If you woke up to the alerts this morning, it probably felt unreal. Midnight vote, Republicans flipped, removed. Shocking betrayal. And the coverage is already trying to reduce it to drama. Another Washington tantrum, another personality clash. But what happened in that chamber wasn't an eruption, it was a controlled demolition, because in the Senate, nobody pulls the pin at 2 a.m. unless the blast has been measured, the exits have been mapped, and the votes have been counted twice. Fear didn't explode last night, fear ran out. Let me translate what you actually watched, because the headlines are lying to you in a very specific way. They're telling you this was a shock, a sudden betrayal, a midnight coup nobody saw coming. That framing is comforting because it implies chaos, and chaos implies accident. But the Senate doesn't do accidents. The Senate does mechanics. What happened in the dead of night wasn't a spontaneous rebellion. It was the moment an internal calculation finally crossed the line from too dangerous to do to too dangerous not to do. And the currency that made that line so hard to cross, fear, finally collapsed. For years, the Republican conference operated under one brutal certainty: step out of line and you die politically. Primaried, defunded, shredded by the base, humiliated on conservative media, reduced to a warning label for everyone else. That's how control worked, not through persuasion, through deterrence. So when you see Republicans suddenly joining Democrats in a removal vote, the question isn't why did they betray him? The real question is, what changed so dramatically that fear stopped working? Because people don't walk into the blast radius unless they believe the explosion is inevitable either way. Now look at the timing. Midnight isn't symbolism. Midnight is strategy. If this had happened at 2 p.m., the phones would have lit up. The pressure campaign would have gone nuclear. The threats would have been broadcast in real time. Every wavering senator would have been yanked back into line before the roll call reached their name. So they didn't do it in daylight. They did it in darkness, when the base is asleep, when the outrage machine is delayed, when leadership can move faster than reaction. That's not bravery, that's operational security. And it tells you something else. The people who planned this knew exactly how dangerous the backlash would be. Which brings us to the second thing people miss. The vote itself wasn't the event. The vote was the final step of a process that had already happened privately. Whip counts don't appear out of nowhere at 1:45 a.m. They're built name by name in quiet hallways, private offices, and off-the-record conversations where senators speak in a language they never use on camera: survival. And when leadership decides it's time, the Senate's procedural machinery becomes a weapon. Late-night sessions, unanimous consent tricks, time agreements, waiving readings, yielding debate back, clearing the deck under the pretext of routine business. It's not glamorous, but it's deadly. It creates a window where something enormous can happen before anyone has time to stop it. That's why the room went quiet. Not because people were emotional, because they understood the gravity of what was being done. The party was removing its own figurehead, not with speeches and theatrics, but with silence and math. And when the math stops working for a political titan, that's when Washington becomes cold, clinical, final. To understand why the firewall collapsed, you have to stop thinking like a voter and start thinking like a senator. Senators don't ask, is this popular? They ask, is this survivable? And over the last several weeks, something shifted inside the Republican conference that never shows up on cable news. Senators were coming back from their states rattled, not energized, not defiant, rattled. The rallies still looked loud, the social media base still looked fierce. But beneath that noise, the internal numbers were changing, quietly, dangerously. What they were seeing wasn't a revolt yet, it was erosion. Soft Republicans drifting away, suburban donors freezing checks, independents turning hostile. The kind of slow bleed that doesn't explode, it drains you out. And here's the brutal truth. Senators can survive anger. They cannot survive inevitability. Once a politician believes the outcome is locked, that keeping someone in power guarantees long-term loss, loyalty stops being a virtue and becomes a liability. That's when fear flips direction. Fear used to say, if you oppose him, you're finished. Now fear started whispering something far worse. If you don't oppose him, you're finished anyway. That's the moment control ends. This is why the defectors weren't just moderates or retirees. That would have been easy, predictable, manageable. The shock came from the middle, the senators from deep red states, the ones who had defended him for years, the ones who had the most to lose. They didn't flip because they suddenly grew a conscience. They flipped because their internal calculus crossed a line. And once that happened, the vote became a logistics problem, not a moral one. This is where procedure becomes power. The Senate isn't governed by speeches. It's governed by rules most Americans never see. If leadership decides not to block a late-night maneuver, it's because blocking it would expose something worse, loss of control, which raises the most unsettling possibility of all. Either leadership was overrun or leadership signed off. Both are catastrophic. If leadership lost control, it means a shadow coalition formed beneath the surface, senators coordinating outside the normal command structure. If leadership allowed it, it means the party made a decision. Cut the cord now or be dragged under later. Either way, the meaning is the same. The party chose the institution over the individual. And once that choice is made, everything changes, because institutions don't feel loyalty. They feel pressure. And pressure is rising fast. Now we need to talk about the cover, because votes like this don't happen unless protection is already in place. No senator walks into a midnight vote knowing they're about to detonate their relationship with the base unless they believe the blast won't kill them. Which tells us something critical happened before the roll call ever began. Deals were cut, not on paper, not in emails, in assurances, primary protection, funding guarantees, committee survival, post-Trump positioning. This is how power actually works in Washington. Loyalty is transactional, and last night the transactions cleared. Multiple senators who voted to remove him released statements within minutes of the vote going public. That timing matters. You don't write a reflective constitutional justification at 3 a.m. unless it was written days ago. This wasn't spontaneous courage. It was coordinated insulation. They knew the backlash would be nuclear. They planned for it. And here's where the midnight timing becomes even more sinister. By voting while the country slept, they robbed the outrage machine of its first and most powerful weapon, real-time mobilization. No live coverage, no viral clips mid-speech, no emergency rallies, no instant donor blitz. By morning, the fact pattern was already locked in. Removal wasn't a threat, it was a reality. And psychologically, that matters more than anything else. People react differently to a fight than to a loss. By the time voters woke up, there was nothing left to stop, only something to process. That's not accidental. That's political jiu-jitsu. Now look at the White House response, or lack of one. Reports suggest they didn't believe the votes were there until it was too late. Whip counts were dismissed as noise. Warnings were waved off. Loyalists were either blind or silent. And that's the most chilling part, because it suggests the collapse wasn't just in the Senate, it was inside the inner circle. Either the intelligence failed or the truth was withheld. In both cases, the result is the same: isolation at the top. When power collapses, it doesn't do so loudly, it hollows out first. And by the time the leader realizes the room is empty, the vote is already happening. The Senate didn't just remove a man last night, it exposed a vacuum. And vacuums don't stay empty for long. What happened last night wasn't the end of a presidency, it was the beginning of a reckoning. Because removing a leader is the easy part. Surviving what comes next is where institutions usually fail. Right now, the Republican Party is standing in a vacuum it created itself. The old center of gravity is gone, but nothing stable has replaced it yet. Power hates that condition. Chaos rushes in to fill it. You're about to see two forces collide. On one side, the institutional wing, senators, donors, strategists who believe they just saved the party from extinction. They're already talking about moving forward, healing, turning the page. On the other side, a base that feels ambushed, ignored, and stripped of its voice by a midnight maneuver they never consented to. That collision is inevitable, and it's going to be violent, not physically, but politically. Primary challenges will explode. Loyalty tests will harden. Entire state parties will fracture. Media ecosystems will split even further into parallel realities, where this vote is either salvation or treason. The senators who flipped are betting on one thing, that exhaustion beats anger over time. They're betting voters will eventually prefer stability over vengeance, that the chaos will cool, that memory will fade. But history doesn't always reward that bet. Sometimes removing a leader doesn't end a movement. it radicalizes it. And that's the question nobody in Washington wants to answer out loud yet. Did the Senate just end an era, or did it light the fuse for something far more unpredictable? Because once you teach voters that their champion can be removed in the dark by procedural force, you also teach them that the system is not neutral, it's adversarial. And adversarial systems don't inspire trust, they inspire backlash. The Senate believes it proved a point last night, that it still holds ultimate power. The voters may decide to test that assumption. What happens next won't be decided in a cloakroom or at 2 a.m. It will be decided in primaries, in turnout, in whether millions of people choose to disengage or to burn everything down electorally. This wasn't the final chapter, it was the inciting incident. If you want to understand who orchestrated this, what promises were made behind closed doors, and why this could reshape American politics for a generation, stay with this channel, subscribe, and watch what happens next, because the real fight starts now.